Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to our research break. The topic today is how to live well with dementia. Just before we jump in, I'd like to open the space with a land acknowledgement. So the Schlegel-UW Research Institute for Aging acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The RIA is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. So welcome. My name is Ali Sirota. I'm a project manager at the Schlegel-UW Research Institute for Aging, or the RIA, and I am delighted to welcome Dr. Carrie McAiney, who will be speaking today. Carrie is the Schlegel Research Chair in Dementia at the RIA and leads studies on how to support people living with dementia and their partners in care. We are so excited to have Carrie join us. We will have a 20-minute presentation followed by 10 minutes for Q&A. I just have a few housekeeping items before we begin. So if you would like to enable subtitles, you can click the closed captioning or CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any technical difficulties today, we are recording the webinar and we'll be sending out an emailed link for the recording. It will also be posted on our website next week. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, you have access to the chat function as well as the Q&A. You're welcome to use the chat to provide comments on what you hear, but we encourage you to use the Q&A for questions that you have throughout the presentation, and we'll bring those forward to Carrie at the end. Now I would like to welcome Carrie once again, and I will be turning it over to her.
Thanks very much, Ali, and thanks to everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you a little bit about what it means to live well with dementia. So this is just to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm hoping to talk about today. So I'll start by providing just a little bit of information about dementia. And this is just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it means to live well with dementia. And then I will spend really the majority of the time today sharing what I'm calling some top 10 tips on supporting people to live well with dementia. And then, as Ali mentioned, we'll have a Q&A towards the end. So dementia is a term that refers to a group of conditions that have a common set of symptoms or characteristics. And this includes things like the ability of a person to, with remembering things. It can impact ability to solve problems or using language, and it can also impact behaviors. So all of these conditions share these common characteristics, and there are different types of dementia then that fall under this category of dementia. So for example, we've got Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type of dementia, but we have other types as well, including vascular, Lewy body, frontotemporal, and others. So you can see from this picture on the side that dementia, you can think of it as that overall category with the different types of dementia falling under it. One of the characteristics of dementia is that it tends to be progressive, which means that symptoms or signs often start out more mild and they get more difficult or get worse over time. So that's important to consider because we do know that that is that progression, or sometimes people talk about it in terms of stages of dementia. So when we're talking about dementia, we're not talking about just one thing. It will vary or be different depending on where a person is along their dementia journey. It's also important to note that dementia affects more than just memory. So we know that short-term memory tends to be impacted first, and then later on there are impacts in terms of a person's longer-term memory. But as indicated in the previous slide, There are also impacts that dementia can have on a person's language, especially in terms of finding the right words to say. It can impact thinking and problem solving, and it can also impact mood and behavior. One of the most important things, though, to understand is that dementia can be different for every person. So, what it looks like for one individual can be quite different than from another individual. And as mentioned, it'll be different over time as well. In terms of what causes dementia, unfortunately, we still have a lot to learn in this area. We don't really fully understand all of the potential factors that might be causing dementia. However, we do know that dementia is not a part of normal aging, and that's important to remember. As we age, there are changes that happen, including to our memory, but this doesn't necessarily mean that we have dementia. And so I'm going to share a few examples of things to help you maybe differentiate between what's normal aging and what might be dementia or could be a sign of dementia. So just to help with understanding. So for example, in normal aging, it's not unexpected or surprising that from time to time you might have trouble remembering the name of an acquaintance. However, if you're having more trouble recognizing or knowing the names of a family member, that could potentially be a sign of dementia. When we have normal aging, sometimes we forget little things. We forget where we put the keys. We maybe forgot why we went into a particular room. That might happen occasionally, and we usually remember those things afterwards. When we forget things a lot more often and we forget events more often, that could potentially be a sign of dementia. When we're speaking and talking with others, every so often we might have trouble finding the word that we want to say. That's completely normal. But in dementia, there might be, more frequent pauses in our speech, and we might substitute in words when we can't quite remember the word that we want to say. And when that's happening a lot more often, again, that might be a sign of dementia. Now, if you're worried about your own memory, but your family and friends are not worried, that's probably a sign or an indication that what you're experiencing is just normal aging. If your family and friends are worried about dementia, that might be something that might be you might want to look into a little bit more. Because sometimes our friends and families might notice that something's happening, but we may not be aware of it ourselves. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea to help you differentiate between normal aging and signs of dementia. The Alzheimer's Society of Canada has some really good resources to help with understanding this difference as well. So in terms of how many people in Canada have dementia, currently there are over 600,000 individuals that are living with dementia. And this number is expected to increase to over 900,000 by 2030. So there's a lot of individuals that are living with dementia and then family members that are supporting them on top of that. When we think about dementia, we might think that most people live in long-term care homes or in nursing homes, but actually over 60% of people with dementia in Canada live in the community. So that I think is helpful context for us. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens when individuals are diagnosed with dementia and then throughout their time with dementia is that they often experience a lot of stigma. So when an individual is first diagnosed, it's often the case that, almost immediately, others think that they can no longer participate. And that means participating in decisions about either their care or about the things that they might want to do during a day. There may be assumptions that they can no longer participate in activities or to enjoy life. And this is really challenging because it starts to shrink a person's world and their social world even more. And so one of the things we hope with webinars like today is that we can start to, get people to question these things and really start to combat that stigma that many individuals with dementia do experience. Because people living with dementia, they have rights, including the right to engage in decisions, to participate in activities, and to live lives that are healthy and meaningful and have joy. And we'll talk about this more in the next few slides, but it's this idea of living well with dementia. Now, what that looks like will also be different from person to person, and it will change as a person's dementia progresses. But I think the important thing is to look at, what can we do to support a person to live a well and fulfilling life despite the dementia that they are also living with. So I'm going to be sharing some top 10 tips for living well with dementia and trying to give a sense of where we're at in our understanding from the research literature. Because there's some areas where we do have a pretty good understanding of, what might help individuals to live well with dementia. Other areas, we're just in the early phases of our understanding. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll get a good sense of how you as an individual with dementia or as a person who might be supporting someone living with dementia can really help them to live as best they can, to live their best life. So first, I think educating yourself about dementia is really key. There's, a lot to learn. People don't always understand what dementia is. They may have misunderstandings about dementia. So that idea that knowledge is power is really important. So you want to understand as much as you can about what this condition is, what to expect, and what you can do to support yourself and others around you moving forward. So I've included a couple of examples of resources here that you might be interested in. And just to let you know, we'll be putting together a list of all of these resources, so you don't have to worry about writing them down. And probably next week, when some information about this recording is sent out by email, we'll include these resources in that message, so you have them in case you want to look at them. So the first resource is called Forward with Dementia. And this is a website that I've worked on with others, actually as part of an international project. And it was co-developed with people living with dementia, family members, and health and social care providers. And this is a resource that provides information and supports, as well as stories from people living with dementia and their family members about their experiences with dementia. So it might be a helpful resource to help educate you about dementia. As well, we have what we call the By Us, For Us guides. So these are guides that have been developed by people living with dementia for people living with dementia. And there's a range of topics that they tackle. And these are all available for free for download on the Research Institute for Aging website. So tip number 1 is educate yourself. Tip number 2 is to be physically active. And being physically active or exercise, this is probably the area where we have the best research literature or research information about the positive effect that physical activity can have on people living with dementia. And that's especially true for aerobic exercise, so exercise activities where we're getting our heart rate up. But it's also important to think about exercises where we're building our strength and our balance, because those things can help prevent falls, and falls can have a lot of negative effects for individuals. So it's obviously important to talk to your family doctors about exercise if that's not something you've been doing, but trying to look to incorporate it as much as you can into your day-to-day life. And so I've included here a link to these DICE resources, Dementia Inclusive Choices for Exercise. This is work that a colleague of mine has done, Dr. Laura Middleton, on trying to make exercise more inclusive for individuals with dementia. Third tip is eating a healthy diet. And so, this is something we often hear, but in the context of dementia, it's important to not only think about what it is that we're eating and trying to eat a well-balanced diet, but also eating together with others. So that idea of having that social component to meals, that sense of community that develops, because that's extremely important for individuals living with dementia. And I've included another link here from another colleague, Dr. Heather Keller, who's done a lot of work in this area. And she's got some great tips and resources that are part of this Dementia Wellness Canada site. The fourth tip is to be socially active. And this idea is really growing in importance, and we're gaining more and more knowledge from research on the importance of being socially active. And so this can include spending time with family and friends and neighbors. And what's most important is that feeling of being connected. So knowing you've got somebody you can turn to, someone you can talk to and that you trust. And that's a lot more important than having a large number of people, right? So it's that feeling of connection that's really most important. And so we can look at, as I mentioned, being socially active, having that social component when we're eating. The same is true with exercise, and also some of the other tips that I'll be talking about on the next few slides. Tip number 5 is using your mind. So trying to take part in activities where you can stimulate your mind, stimulate your thinking. And I've provided just a couple of examples here. So playing games, doing puzzles, and reading. Now, as a person's dementia progresses, sometimes these things, and I'm thinking reading in particular, can get a little bit more challenging over time. So if that happens, then look for opportunities where, you might, for example, a family member or a friend, maybe you can read with the person with dementia or read to them and then have some discussion, for example, about, what's happening in the country or in your community. So just looking at different ways where you can stimulate thinking and stimulate the use of your brain can be a really positive thing to keep living well with dementia. 6 is engaging in activities that you enjoy. So unfortunately, when individuals with dementia are diagnosed, sometimes people feel, either themselves or others around them, feel that, they really can't do the things that they love, that they've always enjoyed doing. And, I would argue that that's not true. We might need to adjust some of those activities, but we want to be able to enjoy life and have fun and smile and laugh and do things that bring us that joy. So I've listed again just a few examples. Music, whether that be listening to music, playing music, singing. There's growing evidence from research in that area of the benefits of music. Participating in arts or crafts. Some people like to garden. Others may enjoy sports. And so, watching sporting activities, reading the newspaper about sporting events, for example. So, if you're an individual with dementia or someone who's supporting a person with dementia, think about the things that they've enjoyed or that you've enjoyed during your life, but also be open to new activities as well. You can learn to maybe paint, for example. Maybe you've never painted, but maybe that is something that you learn to do and that you brings you some joy. So being open to some of those new activities is also a way that we can live well. Spending time outside. This is an area of that's really new in the research, and we still don't understand a lot. But there's some research that's been done that's suggesting that there are a lot of health benefits to spending time outside, and some of you may be thinking, well, of course, and it's true. It makes a lot of sense, but sometimes when a person is diagnosed with dementia, um, we want to protect them. And so we may kind of keep them inside a lot more. But there are benefits and values to being outside. So spending time walking. Uh, there's been a little bit of research on just spending time by trees and looking at trees, and as well, being in parks or gardens. So looking for those opportunities to be outside and to enjoy nature, again, can contribute to living well with dementia. The eighth tip is to take care of other health conditions. So most people that are living with dementia do have other chronic conditions as well. And there can be, sometimes there can be a sense that, there's not a lot of value to looking after those other health conditions. So, related to heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and so on. But all of those conditions, there's actually a relationship with dementia. And so if we take care of those conditions, we manage our blood pressure, we manage our diabetes, that can not only have a positive impact on those conditions themselves, but they may also have a more of an indirect benefit on dementias, in addition. So it's not that they would cure dementia, but that maybe that they can reduce the number of complications that might happen or help us to live healthier longer. So attending regular appointments with your physicians, taking medications as prescribed, and following other health advice from your doctors would be really important. Minimizing stress, which is really important for all of us. So when we reduce stress, that can have positive effects on both our physical health and our mental health. One of the tricky things is, however, is that what is stressful to one person might be quite different than what's stressful to another person. So one of the first steps is to understand what those causes of stress are for you as an individual, and then finding ways to minimize that stress. Of course, engaging in some of the health behaviors that I've talked about so far are definitely ways that you can help to minimize stress. And then the final tip is really for family members, and it's a shout out to those family members who play a crucial role in supporting individuals who are living with dementia. And the tip is really to make sure that you're taking care of yourselves. Um, we know there's decades really of research about the impact that caregiving can have on a person's both physical and mental health. And we know that caregivers or care partners are so dedicated and so committed. They often don't put themselves first. They put the individual first. But it's important to know that the best way to take care of your family member with dementia is to take care of yourself. So a couple of tips for you related to this is to follow the previous 9 tips that I've talked about, because they apply to care partners as well. When you have offers of help, say yes. So say yes to people, let them help you. And in terms of other supports, ask for support early before you really need it, because we know that care partners often really wait until they're quite overwhelmed or in crisis to reach out. And that's really difficult. So focusing on taking care of yourself being proactive and getting some support early is going to help you to take care of your family member with dementia for longer. So those are my top 10 tips. I hope you see that individuals living with dementia really can live well. As mentioned, this looks like, what living well looks like will differ from person to person and over time. And so I think sometimes just focusing on the small things, those small changes, a smile, a laugh, you know, opportunities to hold hands and have even short moments of joy and happiness, that all contributes to living well. And so hopefully you've been able to see that and we'll be able to put some of these tips into place moving forward. Thanks very much for your time today, and I look forward to hearing some of your questions.